Janet Jackson paved the way for the Beyoncés, the Rihannas, the Britney Spears, you name it. And we're going to talk about it. So I watched the Janet Jackson documentary, 4-part documentary series. You can actually watch it on Lifetime, or you watch it on the Lifetime website. This documentary series is just so great at capturing who she is. She tells us her story from her perspective. We see never before seen footage when she was married to Renee. So he filmed her a lot. It's so funny because when you look at her 3 husbands, they kind of have a similar look. She likes that sort of Arab look, which is very interesting. But that's a side note. So yeah, I watched this 4-part documentary. It really gave us an inside look into her life from her perspective, as she says. And there's so many great things to take away from this documentary. Like, the first major takeaway is what a major icon Janet Jackson truly was, and how she really did pave the way in pop music. And another thing that they really talked about in the series was about Michael and her sort of living under his shadow. At the same time, she was able to come into her own, be her own person, and dominate in her own way. It's so funny because they use a very interesting device that is used in storytelling in this documentary series. And I really miss these documentaries about celebrities because they always like, it's part of the writing. They write it in a way that makes you glorify this celebrity, that makes you sort of like look to them as like the greatest thing that ever lived, right? That's what these documentaries do really well. And one of the tools, or one of the devices that they used in this documentary, was what we call the unfair injury, right? And Janet Jackson's unfair injury, well, she had many unfair injuries, but in the first, let's say 1 or 2 episodes, her unfair injury was the fact that she was a Jackson. That was a gift and a curse. She was a Jackson. Her family, the way her dad raised them, they worked really hard to get to, they had to work really hard. They couldn't play it on the street. They couldn't do basic stuff. And they became these stars. And then there was Michael, who became this ginormous superstar. And as much as in the documentary they would talk about Janet's accomplishments, and she really she had like 5 or probably more #1 albums. Like, who does that? I don't think that Beyonce has that. But like, fair enough, in her day there were fewer artists out, but she has like 5 #1s. She has like all these stats that even Michael Jackson didn't accomplish. I remember when she got her Virgin deal, she was the highest paid musician ever. So she definitely was comparable to her brother, but she lived in his shadow, and I just wonder why that is. But then I remember, he's Michael Jackson. Like, because it was so funny. They kept talking about this in the show, about how she lived under his shadow, and they would talk about how she's such a great and amazing musician. And I really was rooting for her. Like, you could really get brainwashed and be like, Janet, yeah. And then you remember, he's Michael Jackson. It was so funny. There was a part in the documentary where he was like singing, and like, I don't know what it is about his voice. I just don't know what it is about him that just makes him the greatest to ever do it. But there's just something so magical about the way that he sings, his voice, all these things. So at the end of the day, I get the fact that it was annoying being cast in his shadow, and she never said that, and she never communicated that in the documentary, but a lot of other people sort of communicated it. They didn't say it was annoying, but they just said she was always under his shadow. And whenever she did interviews, they always asked her about Michael Jackson. But he's Michael Jackson. It's like undeniable. He's such a phenomenon. And so is she. So is she in her own right. But then we remember, he's Michael Jackson. It's not even like he's overhyped, because he's not. He's just the greatest to ever do it. And I get when people are like comparing Beyonce and Michael Jackson, and people get offended by that, because he's Michael Jackson. You cannot compare anybody to Michael Jackson. I'm sorry. But I digressed. Let's go back to Janet. Living under his shadow. But I think part of why she lived under his shadow was the fact that she is his younger sister, That's one thing. Younger siblings always live in the shadows of their older siblings. I think it's so relatable to everyday people. You go to a new school, you go like, with a group of friends, you know, you're always like that person's younger brother or whatever. And we see it too with like Logan Paul and Jake Paul. Jake Paul has accomplished a lot of things that Logan Paul hasn't been able to accomplish. He got on the Disney Channel. If it wasn't for Jake Paul getting on the Disney Channel, Logan wouldn't even be as big as he is. Jake Paul has done this boxing thing and made crazy money. He's actually a professional boxer. Logan Paul just isn't admired in the boxing community. But at the end of the day, because he's the older brother and he's the one that people look to and he's packaged in a way that is like superior, he's the one that people look to. And I see the same thing happening with Janet Jackson and Michael, because sort of Michael Jackson got to this, he got there first. That's what it was. He got there first. And not only did he get there first, he also possesses something so magical that no other human has ever possessed. Right? And that's the other thing. He's Michael Jackson. And so as much as she was living under his shadow, and she's just incredibly crazy talented, she also did something very special and unique. Another reason why Michael Jackson was elevated, especially in the 80s, was because in 80s and 70s, and he was elevated over her, is because he's a man. The reason why they put him on a higher pedestal is not just the fact that he was incredibly talented, but he was also a man. And I want to make it very clear that I'm not saying that Janet Jackson isn't a mega superstar. Like, she really is. But I just think that if people just think about how powerful Michael Jackson's stardom was, it was incomparable to anything that we've ever seen even till this day. So as much as Janet was a super mega ginormous star, everybody in the world is still living under Michael Jackson's shadow. In terms of everybody in Hollywood till this day is still living under Michael Jackson's shadow. So of course, Janet is going to live under Michael Jackson's shadow. But it was an interesting device that they used to sort of like let us root for her. Cause like everybody wants to root for the underdog, right? Interesting device. But needless to say, she is a mega superstar. She is incredible at what she does. And she really earned her way and made moves that even Michael Jackson couldn't made. You know, she talks a lot in the documentary about them being so close as children. They were really close. He and Randy are her closest siblings. But then when he became, I think it was after Thriller, that things started changing for him. And that's when he was like so busy and he was so famous, but he had people around him that sort of like, distanced him from his family. Which is really unfair. Or really sad to see that happen, because had he maybe had his family in his life, maybe his life wouldn't have ended the way it did. Maybe he wouldn't have gone on the path that he went on. Another interesting component to the documentary series is like probably in the first episodes it's that first episode when he talked about how Janet was under her father's control. And that sort of like hindered her career in a way. Well, he brought her to where he sort of trained her to become this amazing star, and she needed to break away from his control so she could really come into her own and create her own quality, like use her own voice and create in her own right. And the funny thing is that we saw the same thing happen with Beyonce. We've seen the same thing happen with a lot of celebrities. This father that sacrifices his entire life to ensure that his kids are put on and become the best that they can be. Because most fathers will not do that, make their career their children. But I think her father saw the talent in that household and really saw these kids are something, right? These kids really have something. And he sacrificed his entire life and dedicated his entire life to ensuring that these kids were superstars. And then they all left him. And on one side, you could see it from his perspective. That's really messed up that they left him. But to be honest, when you really think about it, Janet wouldn't have evolved if she didn't leave her father. And we see that her career really didn't take off until she left her father. It didn't really take off in the sort of superstar realm until she left her father. So it's really important. And I understand, because he was probably, when he was designing her artwork, when he was designing her music, it was all for like probably his era, more traditional, what he thought was cool. But she was young. She was, she was exploring, she was experimenting. And when she created something herself, she would have created something that was contemporary and that was like, breaking barriers, pushing the envelope in contemporary music at the time. And we really saw that. And when I think about my experience with Janet Jackson, from the 90s, and thinking about such beautiful music that she had back then, and even the early 2000s, I never would have ever compared her to Michael Jackson. I never put them in the same category, because what they offered was so different. And that brings me to my point about why was Michael Jackson more famous than her, right? He had his masculinity. He was a man, and the world would always put a man on a bigger pedestal than a woman. But what Janet Jackson did in the music industry, and why I say that because of her, we wouldn't have, if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't have Beyonce, we wouldn't have Rihanna, we wouldn't have Aaliyah, we wouldn't have Britney Spears. It's because Janet Jackson was able to bridge the gap between female pop star and male pop star and make it bigger and better than a man, right? She bridged that gap because of that comparison between her and Michael Jackson. Fair enough, she was living under her shadow, fair enough, but they were so similar in their art. They were so similar in everything. And even though she was kind of living under her shadow, she sort of had this synergy, or sort of had this way of creating a pathway for women to become as big as men in music. We think about the Beatles, we think about Michael Jackson, we think, there wasn't really, there was Diana Ross, there was Madonna, but they weren't paid the same as men, So I really think that Janet Jackson was able to bridge that gap, that later on created the Britney Spears and the Beyoncés. Because let's just face it, today, female singers are bigger than male singers, no matter what. And let me tell you why. What Janet Jackson did, and obviously I'm sure people will give credit this to Madonna as well, but what Janet Jackson did, because Michael was this huge star, right? What she did was offer up her femininity in a way that Michael Jackson just couldn't and didn't have. And at the end of the day, sex sells. I made a whole video about the over-sexualization of Black femininity. And we could say that in a way, and I'm going to tread lightly with this because I'm not accusing her of anything, but we can say in a way she sort of pushed the envelope, or sort of progressed, or it sort of probably was one of the creators of the over-sexualization of Black femininity. But the way that she did it was a very tasteful way, and it's not her fault that it sort of spiraled out of control. But I will say that using her femininity was a tool that Michael Jackson did not have. And it created a model that the Britney Spears and the Beyoncés could use to become bigger than Michael Jackson, or maybe not bigger than Michael Jackson, but some people say Beyonce is bigger than Michael Jackson, right? And the reason why is Beyonce, if there was okay, let's put it this way, right? There's going to be more eyeballs on a female star today than there is on a male star with the same talent, etc. Why will there be more eyeballs? Because of femininity. And I'm saying that Janet Jackson used her femininity as a tool to gain more fandom or superstardom in a way that Michael Jackson couldn't use it. Or in a way that Michael Jackson couldn't do. Because Michael Jackson had his masculinity, but he wasn't the most masculine, he wasn't the most masculine musician either, but it wasn't really about that with him. It was just about him being an incredible dancer, him being a talent. But Janet Jackson possessed all of those things as well. And on the flip side, she also had a tool, which is her femininity and her sexuality. And that was a tool that could be used to market, because at the end of the day, like it or not, sex sells. And talking about this femininity, I wanted to move into the section where they talk about Justin Timberlake. But before we get into that, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all of the above. It really pushes this video out in the algorithm and encourages me to make more videos. This video is brought to you by mintedculture.com, where I put all of my content. Guys, if you don't know, I have 4 different channels here on YouTube. I have this channel, Brand Video Pro. I have the Kenim O Show. I have Stream OVG and Stream OVG Business, and all of my content goes right directly to mintedculture.com. Every single day I release a couple new videos, so there's always new content, so you can check the site every single day. Also, when you go to mintedculture.com, you can book a one-on-one strategy call with me. We can talk about Web3, the metaverse, modern marketing with social media, digital marketing. We can talk about filmmaking and documentary filmmaking. You know, I've been in the game. I've been in media for 16 years. I've been in filmmaking for 14 years. So I've been doing this for a long time. So you can book a one-on-one consultation with me. Head on over to mintedculture.com. All right, let's get into this. And talking about this femininity, I wanted to move into the section where they talk about Justin Timberlake and the whole Super Bowl situation, which was just absolutely ridiculous and devastating, the way that she was blamed for that. You see, personally, I don't take responsibility for other people's actions, right? I don't take responsibility, and she's the one that did that to her, right? And obviously it was a mistake, you know, but everybody turning on her and blaming her. 2 reasons. 3 reasons, right? She's a woman. That's the first one. So when people want to tear somebody down and it's a woman, they're excited to do that. They'll do it faster than anything, right? Second reason is that she's black. So she's a black woman. So being a woman and being black, those are the main reasons why they did that. But then in addition, to add, you know, fuel to the fire, that's when Michael Jackson was dealing with his child molestation accusation claims. And so that really just put more fuel to the fire. So it was like all of those things, in my view, that sort of like, you know, pushed that. And for me, what really pissed me off is the fact that when they sort of canceled her and they didn't invite her to the Grammys, or they disinvited her to the Grammys, but they had Justin Timberlake performing at the Grammys. And to me, in my view, it's like Justin Timberlake is the one that did this. And what is really irritating about it is that it was his white privilege, right? Not even just him being, it's not even just his white privilege, but the fact that he was a white man, the coupling of that he was the one that committed this offense, but everybody blamed Janet Jackson for it. And instead of doing anything to Justin, we reward Justin for doing something that Janet had nothing to do. Like, it was ridiculous to me. And in my view, like, again, I don't take responsibility for anyone's actions. And it was so terrible that, you know, so I get why social media was so pissed. Like, I saw someone who they put out a tweet saying, like, Janet Jackson saying that she forgives him, and me turning my face, I'm not listening. I completely understand that, because I think in today's world, if he was like let's say a male white musician in today's world, and they canceled a black female, social media will demand that he rejects performing at the Grammys. He would have to decline performing at the Grammys. And we really have to understand the way media was back then in 2004. This is before social media. This is before Twitter and Facebook and all of that was popping, right? These media outlets were the gatekeepers. They decide if you get airtime. They decide if you get canceled or not. They were the gatekeepers. Because of social media, thank God, it's revived a Janet Jackson's career. It's revived different people's careers, because now consumers can just go directly to the, you know, musicians that they want to see, even though low-key there still are gatekeepers. Facebook, big tech is like gatekeepers, but at the end of the day, look, there's more access. I'll put it that way, because big tech could decide they're going to cancel you from their platform, and what are you going to do? So yeah, there are gatekeepers. There were gatekeepers, and they decided that they're going to take Janet Jackson out of the equation. And that really hurt her career, which I find extremely offensive because it was not her fault. She didn't do anything. And the fact that the person that made the mistake was glorified and they ignored it as if nothing happened. But the person that was actually, if anything, she was the one being mistreated, even though it was a mistake. It was her breasts that were being exposed, right? And what really annoyed me is when he called her, and I think to me, this was such a big mistake. She said Justin Timberlake called her once. Can you imagine? He only called her once. Is he crazy? He called her and he's like, I feel like I should make a statement. I feel like I should say something. And she was like, no, it's just going to hurt you. No. That was the biggest mistake that she ever made. I mean, I get for her career, she's been around for 6 decades. She's been in the music industry for 6 decades. So maybe it's not that big of a deal for her. What's 10 years, right? She just missed 10 years out of it. Okay. But in my view, I feel like that was really bad that she said that, because she could have really, he should have been accountable for that. He should have come out and said something. And so she took an L there, because them not blaming him, they blamed her. He should have come out and made a statement that he made the mistake. And I can't believe that she didn't let him do that. That was ridiculous. I feel like both of them should have come out together and been like, so it was so unfortunate. And I feel like it makes me look at him sideways, because even though she said, no, don't do it, don't do it, he was really just caring about his career and his life, which is selfish in my view, when he's the one that made the mistake. I think that he should have been a brave person and said, no, I'm going to go out, I'm going to make a statement because I don't want it to hurt you, because it was my mistake. Especially when he saw that they started canceling her after. Like, I just feel like I'm looking at him sideways. I wasn't even looking at him sideways until I watched the documentary. Straight up, I'm looking at him sideways though. Justin. And then I saw people commenting about Jermaine Dupri cheating on her. I mean, hey, it is what it is, right? And then Michael Jackson's death. What a sad moment in her life. Either way, I really loved it. It was such a great documentary. I see why it was trending, and it just reminded us of the impact of Janet Jackson. The media tried to silence her for the past 10 plus 20. Oh my God, it's almost 20 years. Jesus. 2004 is when that happened. So almost 20 years. They've tried to sort of silence her or diminish her or whatever, because you don't really see her being glorified and celebrated the way that you see other people being celebrated. It doesn't make sense. Janet Jackson made a major contribution to music and entertainment, and she deserves all the accolades. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all the above. My name is Kenim, and see you next time. Peace.